There are moments in a royal court that no protocol book prepares anyone for. Moments where crowns mean nothing, bloodlines mean nothing, and the only thing standing between dignity and disgrace is one man willing to say the words no one else dared to speak. This is one of those moments. The Kingdom of Hartmore had seen many grand ceremonies in its long and complicated history. Wars had been fought on its green hills. Treaties had been signed in its marble halls. Kings had died quietly in their beds and sometimes not so quietly. But on the afternoon of the Luminary Awards, the most prestigious humanitarian ceremony in all of Hartmore, named in honor of the late Princess Alara, something happened that would be whispered about in palace corridors for years. Something that no royal aide wrote into any official record. Something that only the people who were in that room truly understood. Prince Aldrich of Hartmore walked up to the Queen Consort Seraphine and told her, in a voice low enough that only she could hear it, that she needed to leave. Not tomorrow, not after the ceremony, now. To understand why Aldrich did what he did, you have to understand what the Luminary Awards meant to him. You have to understand who his mother was, what she built, and what it cost her. Princess Alara came into the royal family of Hartmore as a young woman from a minor noble house, chosen more for her grace and her soft beauty than for any expectation that she would one day become the kingdom's most beloved figure. She married Crown Prince Cador in a ceremony the whole kingdom watched, a fairy tale played out on the steps of the Grand Cathedral of Wellhaven, and for a short while, the people of Hartmore believed they were witnessing the beginning of something beautiful. It was not beautiful, not behind the palace doors. Cador was not a cruel man by nature, but he was a distracted one. He had loved someone else long before Alara came along, a woman named Seraphine, from one of the oldest and most powerful noble families in the kingdom. Their connection had been complicated for years, a thing everyone at court knew about and no one spoke of directly. When Cador married Alara, Seraphine did not disappear. She simply moved to a different corner of the picture. And Alara, who had entered the palace with hope and a willingness to love, slowly came to understand that she was not in a marriage so much as an arrangement. She could have turned inward. She could have retreated into the cold formality that most royal women of her era wrapped themselves in like armor. Instead, Alara turned outward, toward the people. She began visiting the villages at the edge of Hartmore's territory, places the royal court rarely acknowledged. She sat with farmers whose harvests had failed. She held children whose parents had been taken by illness. She stood in drafty community halls and listened, really listened, to people who had never once been listened to by anyone with a royal seal on their carriage. The people of Hartmore did not just grow to love Alara. They grew to need her in the way people need something that quietly keeps them warm, something they only truly understand the value of once it is gone. She created the Luminary Foundation in the 14th year of her marriage. Its purpose was simple on the surface: to find ordinary people across Hartmore who were doing extraordinary things for their communities, and to honor them publicly, to give their work visibility and support and meaning. But what the Luminary Foundation really was, what it meant in the deeper sense, was Alara's answer to everything the palace had refused to give her. It was her legacy, built entirely on her own terms with her own hands. It was proof that she had mattered, not because of who she had married, but because of who she had chosen to become. Aldrich grew up watching his mother do this work. He was a boy the first time he accompanied her to a luminary ceremony, sitting beside her in the front row as she handed awards to a shepherd who had organized food sharing across 3 villages during a drought, to a young woman who had started the kingdom's first free schoolroom for the children of servants, to an old physician who had been traveling by foot for 30 years to treat patients in areas with no medical care. He watched his mother's face during those presentations, and he saw something on it that he almost never saw when she was inside the palace. He saw peace. He carried that with him. He carried it through the difficult years that followed, through the quiet dissolution of his parents' marriage, through the years of navigating a palace that had never quite made space for what his mother represented. He carried it through her death, which came too early and too hard and left a silence in him that he was still learning to live inside of. When the Luminary Foundation Board asked Aldrich if he would take over the patronage of the awards ceremony after Alara passed, he did not hesitate. He reorganized the ceremony. He expanded it. He made it bigger and more visible and more meaningful than it had ever been. He understood that honoring this work was the closest he could get to honoring her. Every year he stood at that podium in the Grand Hall of Wellhaven and spoke about his mother's vision. And every year he felt, for a few hours at least, like she was still somewhere nearby. He was not going to let anyone compromise that. Not for protocol, not for politics, not for anyone. The morning of the ceremony began the way those mornings always did. Aldrich's household staff had been preparing for days. The grand hall had been dressed with the ivory and gold that Alara had always favored, flowers from the same mountain region she had loved to visit, candles arranged in the same pattern she had once sketched out herself on a napkin at dinner, a napkin that Aldrich had kept. The recipients had arrived the evening before and were staying at the palace guest quarters, nervous and overwhelmed in the quiet way that people who have spent their lives doing good work are always nervous when that work is suddenly seen. Aldrich had spent the early morning reviewing their stories personally. He always did this, not because his staff had not already prepared thorough briefings, but because he wanted to know these people. He wanted to be able to look them in the eye when he shook their hand and say something real, not something memorized. He was still reading through the last file when his senior aide, a composed man named Harwick who had been with the household for 11 years, knocked and entered with the careful energy of someone carrying news they would rather not be carrying. Aldrich looked up. Harwick informed him that Queen Consort Seraphine would be attending the ceremony. The room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with sound. Aldrich set down the file. He asked Harwick to repeat what he had just said. Harwick repeated it. Seraphine had been included on the final guest list, added through a channel in the palace administrative office, an extension of the courtesy that was routinely given to members of the senior royal household for major public events. It had been processed as a standard inclusion. No one had flagged it because technically, procedurally, it followed the rules. Aldrich said nothing for a moment. Then he asked Harwick to leave the room and close the door. He sat alone for several minutes. The history between Seraphine and his mother was not something Aldrich had ever spoken about publicly. He was not a man who expressed personal grievances through official channels. He had watched the way his mother handled it, with dignity, with restraint, with a refusal to reduce herself to bitterness, and he had taken that as his model. He had been courteous to Seraphine at the formal events where their presence overlapped. He had never made scenes. He had never issued statements. He understood that some things in royal life simply had to be carried quietly. But this was different. This was his mother's ceremony, not a general court event, not a state function where her attendance was neutral or expected. This was the Luminary Awards. This was the one day of the year that existed entirely as a tribute to Alara's life and her choices and her love for the people of Heartmoor. Seraphine sitting in that hall, accepting the hospitality of an event built on Alara's name, watching as recipients honored Alara's vision, it was not something Aldrich could quietly carry. He called Harwick back in and gave him a single instruction. He was going to speak to Seraphine directly before the ceremony began. Harwick was to arrange for them to have a private moment in the east anteroom. No staff present beyond Harwick himself. No record of the meeting. Seraphine was already dressed for the ceremony when Aldrich arrived. She was composed in the way she always was in formal settings, upright and measured, every element of her presentation deliberate. She had been queen consort for several years now, and she wore the role with the practiced ease of someone who had long prepared for it, who had, in truth, spent most of her adult life preparing for it in one way or another. When Aldrich walked in, she offered him the kind of pleasant expression that palace life had made second nature to both of them. She said something welcoming, something about what a meaningful day it was. Aldrich did not sit down. He told her, in a voice that was quiet and entirely controlled, that he was asking her not to attend the ceremony. He told her that the Luminary Awards was a space he considered sacred to his mother's memory, and that he believed her presence there would not serve the spirit of the occasion. He told her he was not making an accusation, and he was not seeking a confrontation. He was simply asking her to understand that this particular space, on this particular day, was not the right one for her to occupy. Seraphine's composure shifted, not visibly, not in any way that would have been apparent to a casual observer, but Aldrich had been reading royal faces his entire life. He saw it. She told him that she had been officially invited, that she had every right to attend as a member of the royal household, that she had come in good faith and with genuine respect for the occasion. Aldrich listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he told her quietly that he understood all of that, and he told her that nonetheless he was asking her to leave. He was not asking her to leave the palace. He was not asking her to leave any future event. He was asking her, specifically and only, not to sit in his mother's ceremony. He told her that the people being honored that day had dedicated years of their lives to causes his mother had believed in, and they deserved a ceremony that was fully about that, fully about Alara's legacy, without any undercurrent of complexity or history pulling at the edges of it. He said that he would ensure she faced no public embarrassment. Her departure would be handled privately. An appropriate reason would be given if one was needed at all. No one beyond the people in this room needed to know the content of this conversation. He told her he hoped she would understand. There was a silence in the anteroom, then that pressed against the walls. Seraphine looked at him for a long moment, and in that look was something complicated, something Aldrich could not fully read and did not particularly try to. He was not there to understand her. He was not there to argue or to wound or to score anything. He was there because his mother had spent a lifetime being gracious in situations that had not earned her grace, and he was standing in the place she had always stood with one difference. He was not going to be gracious about this. He was going to protect her space the way she had never been able to protect it herself. Seraphine told him she would need a few minutes. Aldrich nodded, he thanked her, and he left the anteroom. The Luminary Awards ceremony that year was, by every account of the people who attended it, one of the finest in the Foundation's history. The grand hall was full. The recipients were extraordinary. A woman who had turned her own grief into a kingdom-wide support network for families dealing with sudden loss. A young man who had spent 5 years building bridges, literal wooden bridges, connecting isolated farming communities to the main roads. A retired schoolteacher who had spent her own savings creating a small traveling library that had now reached over 40 villages. When Aldrich stood at the podium to speak about his mother, he spoke about her the way he always did, with simplicity and with love. He said that she had believed, above everything else, that ordinary people were the real architects of a kingdom's heart. He said that the people in this room, the recipients and the colleagues and the community members who had come to celebrate them, were exactly the people she had meant. He said she would have loved this day. He did not cry. He had learned a long time ago how to hold the grief steady when he was in public. But the people in the front row, those who had known Alara personally, could see what was underneath the composure. They always could. After the ceremony at the private reception, Harwick approached Aldrich quietly and confirmed that Seraphine had left the palace grounds before the event began. There had been no incident, no public word. Aldrich thanked him. Then he went back to his guests and spent the next 2 hours doing what his mother had always done at these receptions. He listened. He asked questions. He made every person he spoke with feel, for the length of that conversation, that they were the only person in the room. It was the least he could do. It was everything she had taught him. Outside the grand hall of Wellhaven, the evening light fell golden across the old stone buildings, the same light that had fallen across this kingdom for centuries, over everything that had been built here and broken here and quietly, stubbornly, rebuilt. Somewhere in it, if you believed in such things, was the faint trace of a woman who had loved this kingdom more than it had ever quite loved her back, who had given it something it would carry long after the names of its kings, and its politics had blurred into history. Her name was on the awards, her vision was in the work, her light was in the people who kept doing what she had believed in. And her son had made sure, on this one night at least, that nothing else was.